Well, hey everybody, Mr. D back again for more remote learning. We're going to take a look at invasive plant species today, and this lesson to me can be a real bummer. Um, there are so many invasive plants on our landscape nowadays. You guys know about my deep-seated hatred for Norway maple, one of our most invasive trees in Maine, and there's plenty more invasive plants where that came from. But I think it's important to understand how many invasive plants we have growing in our landscape now, how they get here, how we can prevent that, and it's just worth knowing. Somebody who's in tune with the landscape around them is able to pick up on these things and has an appreciation for those native plants that evolved here. So let's jump right to it. What makes an invasive species invasive? Well, invasives are non-native species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. There's a lot there, but basically it's a plant that's not from here, that has ended up here and is outcompeting the native plants or doing harm in some other way. We have 2,100 plant species in Maine. A third of them are non-native. We're talking about 700 non-native plants growing in Maine, which is just crazy to think about. That's all people moving plants around, okay? But only a fraction of those are considered invasive, meaning they're escaping and outcompeting native plants. But just even that fraction are doing a whole lot of damage, especially here in southern Maine where there's a little bit more of a human footprint. So how do these invasive plants get here? Many of them are ornamental plantings. That one you see right there is called Japanese knotweed. A lot of people just call it bamboo, even though it's not a true bamboo. It looks like bamboo, especially once it's shed its leaves. Japanese knotweed was originally brought to North America as an ornamental plant in people's gardens, and it is like impossible to get rid of if you have it growing on your property anywhere. You know this. It loves to grow along roadsides right there because you'll have, when they're building the road, the company that's using the fill to build that road will get contaminated fill that has Japanese knotweed roots in it, and all it takes is one little piece of root and you've got a whole colony of knotweed that's going to come up and spread right down that roadside that loves recently disturbed soil. So Japanese knotweed is absolutely everywhere in southern Maine, and it's a classic example of an invasive plant that was brought here as an ornamental. We get tag-alongs and other plant purchases. You'll see this at greenhouses all the time and things. You buy a plant, but you look in the pot and there's other little things growing in there and you never know what you could be moving around. And then that soil contamination is another one we just talked about with things like Japanese knotweed, but a lot of our other invasives we're worried about getting moved around in contaminated soil. So they get moved around in a variety of ways. They get here in a variety of ways. Why are they so successful? Well, here in North America, or Maine, for example, they lack the natural predators and diseases from where they evolved. So there's a great example of one right there called purple loosestrife that grows in marshy areas in Maine. You may look at that and go, wow, that is beautiful. But in fact, that is a non-native invasive plant that is choking out all of the native wetland species that normally grow out there, and it's changing the habitat and making it less desirable to whatever maybe amphibians or reptiles used to use that marsh, or the birds that nested out there. Certainly all those blossoms are probably pretty valuable to pollinators like bees, but there's a give and take here. There could be benefits, but there are also there's also loss of biodiversity. Now that we've filled that entire meadow with one species of plant, we've lost all the diversity, the native plants that used to grow out there. So many of these guys leaf out earlier than our native species, and many are early successional species, meaning we create a disturbance, and next thing you know, the first things that show up are these invasive plants, and they get a foothold before the natives can, and they just shade everything out and create an invasive mess. And why should you care about this stuff? What's the big deal? Well, it can create a complete change in our forest structure. It can threaten native wildlife because our wildlife haven't evolved with these plants and they maybe don't recognize them as food sources, or they don't produce the right kind of cover. It can create massive increases in agricultural costs. I can tell you firsthand, as somebody who works at a farm, we deal a ton with invasive plants, and the people I work for spend a lot of money trying to control invasive plants. on their property. And it can really decrease your property value. Having a property that's choked with Japanese knotweed or whatever other invasive plant you want to talk about can cause major damage. There's things like Japanese barberry that are taking over some woodlots around here that really change the habitat type and make a woodlot less desirable for somebody who's looking to buy a piece of land. So next class, I'm gonna film what I call the invasive walk. I'm gonna take a walk along the Eastern Trail and show you all the different invasive plants growing along it. It's a super bummer, but it's kind of interesting. And this is just a short list of some of the things we'll see out there. Obviously, Norway maple, common buckthorn, Japanese barberry, Japanese knotweed, and so many more. So stay tuned for next class. For today, you're going to go ahead and you're going to do a profile on one species of invasive plant in Maine. I'll give you a link to use to find a list of them and answer a few basic questions. But pick one, learn a little bit more about it. Maybe you'll be a little more in tune as you're walking around out in the woods or around the Eastern Trail, and you'll find the species that you made a profile on, and you'll be able to impress your friends